Governor Hutchinson going for a second. Which Democrat will try for a first? 4 U.S. House seats are up. Will the tumult in Washington be a factor? On the business front, big losses for a big industry. And a loss that has everyone smiling. Arkansas Week, next.
Local broadcast of Arkansas Week is made possible in part by the award-winning Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, Arkansas's largest major newspaper, bringing you local, national, and international news since 1819. By the Arkansas Times, keeping you informed by covering people, events, and politics in Arkansas. By FM 89, KUAR in Little Rock, with in-depth news reporting, analysis, and discussion each weekday.
Hello again, everyone. Thanks for joining us for Arkansas Week. ASA in 18. Not an endorsement, but an announcement. And that's where we'll begin tonight. Hoyt Purvis joins us, columnist for the Northwest Arkansas edition of the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette. Jacob Kaufman, reporter for KUAR Public Radio in Central Arkansas. And thanks, guys, for wandering in. To no one's surprise, after all, he has almost $1 million in the Treasury. Governor Hutchinson formally announced for re-election this past week, and Jacob, he would seem to be the odds-on favorite.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I guess this week was as good a time as any for him to announce. There wasn't any pressure to do so. He certainly, I guess, headed off any possible primary challengers, although he's enormously popular. He's more popular than the president. In the last round of Talk Business and Politics Hendricks College poll, his approval rating has grown since he was first elected to, I think, the upper 50s, near 60% or so. He's got a couple legislative sessions, special sessions under his belt as well. The legislature, not a fan favorite of many people in the state perhaps, but his individual things that he's promised, that he's highlighted for his agenda from his last campaign, he's fulfilled many of them in a lot of ways. One of the biggest ones being he promised a $100 million income tax cut, which he delivered. The next campaign doesn't look like there's just going to be a big pitch for a hallmark tax cut bill, though, at this point.
Well, he did, though, evidence or express some interest in continuing to cut taxes, though.
That's certainly true, and part of the effort from the latest rounds of tax cuts from the last session was to create a task force comprised of legislators to look comprehensively at the tax system. I spoke with State Senate President Jonathan Dismang a while ago about that, and I asked him if they're going to have like a big package, a big income tax cut that they could really point to as a hallmark, and he kind of shied away from that a little bit, didn't take it off the table by any means, but it seems like they're looking at a lot of things like what exemptions work, what exemptions don't work, and if there's any evidence from the last session, it seems like there are going to be a lot of battles over that in the Republican-controlled legislature, because cutting one person's exemption to another person might seem like a tax hike.
Well, in the view of certain interest groups, it certainly would, Hoyt.
Well, as Jacob indicated, there's certainly no surprise that the governor is announcing what everyone assumed would be the case, and things have gone relatively smoothly with him. He's gotten at least some of the tax cut that he had promised, and interestingly, he talks about low unemployment during the first part of his term, and it's true. To what extent he may be responsible, we could argue about that. But the fact that unemployment rates are at an all-time low, or something close to that. But there's still issues. I mean, he managed to sort of keep the lid on the whole Medicaid issue, the hybrid Medicaid proposal that is still sort of simmering out there somewhere. We don't know exactly how that's going to eventually turn out, but right now things look very good for the governor.
Well, Hoyt mentioned the jobless rate. Friday morning, the administration, the Hutchinson administration, and the Trump administration too, got some very good news. Who would have thought the February, or rather the March unemployment number could get any lower? But it did. Arkansas now stands at 3.5, and that is yet another record low, and very good news for the administration because more people employed, the more taxes go into general revenue.
That's certainly the hope. It's you never want the employment number to go up the other way around. But as we know, the Hutchinson administration, the state government, is still facing some budget problems. There's a $43 million or so across-the-board cut to many state agencies that was proposed for the 2018 fiscal year. So we have that. Even though the unemployment rate is really good, that's great for individual Arkansans who have the jobs. But if they need to rely on government services, those sorts of things, it looks like there's an effort to scale those back because of budget issues.
Well, yeah, I mean, the question of the overall economic situation, while there's certainly good news on the unemployment front, if you step back and look at the broader economic trends, there's not a lot that Arkansas can point to as being great news at this stage. And as Jacob indicated, certainly, given the tax cuts and the fact that there are a number of programs in the areas of government that need some some fiscal stimulus, it's not clear where that's going to come from.
Well, Jacob mentioned a second ago there seems to be, even on the part of the governing majority in the General Assembly, a bit of reluctance to go much farther on tax cuts. And
I'm sure there are absolutely certain portions of the Republican Party that want to go much further. Part of the reason why this task force was created is because some legislators to the right of some Republicans wanted even deeper tax cuts. The last session, they had about a $50 million tax cut, mostly for middle and lower income people. There were some prominent Republicans, too, not just extreme members of the party, who called for another $100 million targeted to wealthier earners. So there's certainly a desire to do that. So I guess if there is going to be another major income tax cut type of deal coming out of this task force, they're going to have recommendations for the 2018 session. I guess the subtext is they really want to offset that by changing some exemptions.
Well, even if it were to be revenue neutral, and secretly I suspect they hope it would provide some sort of bonanza. Well, for example, and I've talked to some senior Republican members of the General Assembly who are decidedly antsy about the state's fiscal situation, and some Democrats of some experience who call this a crapshoot.
Right. Well, I think I might have said this earlier, but the unemployment numbers are so great for the state. If we're in an economic downturn all of a sudden, all these things could change so much. If we think where we were in 2009, the unemployment rate. So Arkansas has a lot of things working for it in its favor right now, and we're still sort of in this constraint. A lot of it is, as Hoyt was mentioning, the constraint was kind of created by the legislature because they changed the amount of revenue coming into the government.
Well, we're still without a highway program. We're going into the next cycle without a highway program, really. And just this past week, you saw agencies beginning to acknowledge respond to the administration's demand, or directive, I should say, that spending be curtailed. And I think Department of Correction, about $50 million. Well,
you mentioned highways. That was one of the big unresolved things that they didn't get through the last legislative session. The governor didn't put his hands on it too much, but it was well known that they wanted to raise some taxes or change some wholesale gasoline taxes to try to get additional money to meet federal matching funds. Didn't really happen. Those are some outlying issues still, the long-term issue of highway funding. The corrections officials, they saw this in the Arkansas Democrat Gazette this week. The quote was that he's going to try to beg the governor for more funds. He's one of the correction system is one of the things will face these $43 million in across-the-board cuts because it's a lower priority than other services. Of course, law and order, prisons, that's a big talking point, and it's something that most people want adequately funded. The state's prison system has been beleaguered and overcrowded for a number of years now.
Can't recall a time when it wasn't.
Well, just to say another word about the highways, it's interesting because traditionally this is an area where both public and business support has been strong, and generally whatever was sought has been appropriated, or one way or another, and that's not resolved yet. I mean, maybe it will continue, but at some point that's going to bite, I think.
Love the smell of asphalt in the morning, but we're not sniffing enough of it, and you hear that from every sector of the economy.
Yeah. Right, and that's, there's been, of course, massive flooding and damages in parts of the state in the past month or so. We're talking about maintaining roadways in normal times through ice storms, but we've also, a lot of roadways are facing catastrophic incidents as well, and that's something that has to be addressed every single year.
Well, in terms of economic downturns, we got updated figures this past week, estimates of the crop losses, farm losses, particularly in the Delta and in the Northeast, and they're into 9 figures.
Yeah, the heavy rains and the flooding, extensive flooding. It's hard for people maybe in other parts of the state to realize just how extensive the flooding was, as you mentioned, in Northeast Arkansas and the Delta. I think the latest figure now is 175 million in losses. Particularly, I think rice farmers have been especially hard hit. So it's a tough situation.
And in rice especially, it's Arkansas's largest agricultural crop.
Right.
We provide about a little over, I think, half of the nation's total rice output. So in some ways, it's kind of a national issue with the rice crop. And part of this is they have a June 9th deadline to replant their rice crop if they want to get crop loss insurance. It's one of the state's largest industries is facing a deadline that they don't particularly like. It's a new deadline, this June 9th date to replant your crops. Governor Asa Hutchinson has petitioned the federal government, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, to do something about it, review this June 9th date. It doesn't look like anything will happen this year, maybe in future years. I spoke to a University of Agriculture extension agent, and they thought this flooding might be a catalyst to change the date for replanting your rice crop. Because basically now, if you plant it this late in the season, your returns are going to be a lot less. The quality of seeds available are worse as well. So it's a real tough predicament for farmers. Even now that the floodwater is receding, they're certainly not out of high water.
Don't have a U.S. Senate race. We talked about Mr. Hutchinson's campaign. We don't have Arkansas doesn't have a U.S. Senate race on the ballot in 18, but of course all 4 U.S. representatives will be up for renomination. Difficult for me to see as well positioned as they seem to have been. Difficult for me to see that they would have a great deal of difficulty. Of course, against that backdrop is the tumult and the turmoil in Washington. How much trouble could Mr. Trump be if he were trouble? Hoyt?
Well, there's there's definitely trouble. I would say that in my many decades of watching Washington, watching politics and government and the
quite
media,
a few years up there.
This is it's been an extraordinary week. And, you're starting to hear rumblings about, well, can the Republicans maintain their majorities in the House and Senate, given all the controversy that's been raging, and certainly some indication that Democrats might do much better in the next election cycle and next year. But you would have to say, as of right now, there's not a lot of indication that members of the Arkansas delegation are in any kind of trouble at this point. Now, given the volatility of the political climate right now, you can't say anything with certainty. There are, and it's been interesting to see. Members of the Arkansas delegation generally have been very, if not silent, have not had much to say about all the things that are going on there. I think Senator Bozeman probably has had a bit more to say. He was very strong in supporting the appointment of the special counsel, Mr. Mueller, and said it's important to get to the bottom of this whole Russian issue. Other members of the delegation, I think all of them have had good things to say about Mueller, but that's about as far as they've gone. So as of now, you can't. I should say this: probably the one Arkansas political figure who has had the most to say on the subject is our Attorney General. She's been a somewhat regular guest on some of the cable TV shows, and she's very, very, very supportive of President Trump. The others the members of the delegation have generally been very limited in their comments.
Muted almost, yeah.
Muted is a good word.
Well,
yes.
if any members of the congressional delegation have been watching some of Leslie Rutledge's appearances, I think they'll find it's kind of difficult at times to defend the president because the explanations or justifications for things evolve usually on a daily basis. And Leslie Rutledge was caught in that during one interview I saw where she provided an explanation from the president from the previous day that he had since changed, and she wasn't aware of his changed explanation. And I think you're right that these races are, pretty securely in Republican hands for 2018. But one difference from the last election is that it seems like, or it feels like that this time at least there will be players on the field against them in case something does happen. In the previous election, Democrats fielded just one candidate, Central Arkansas, Diane Curry, against French Hill. She was not well supported at all. Otherwise, there's libertarians all around. Easy for Republicans to dispatch them. This time, we have at least one Republican primary challenger in Northwest Arkansas announced. There's a Democrat running also for Steve Womack's seat. There's a few different people who I've talked to that say in the next few weeks they're going to file against French Hill on the Democratic side. So it's going to be it'll look different this election, even if they still might have some comfortable margins at this point.
Well, let's look at the northwest corner first, Mr. Womack's district, which stretches all the way down to the south now.
Yes.
What do we know about his opposition, and what do we know? How do we assess Mr. Womack's position right now?
Well,
seems comfortable.
I think Womack is relatively comfortable, and there have been occasions where he's sort of not hewed precisely to the party line, I think. But the problem is that the candidates who have announced thus far, one Republican, one Democrat, to oppose Womack, assuming he would be the nominee against the Democratic candidate. These are not people with high profiles. Now, that's not to say that with elections are a long way off, they have ample opportunity, and we may well get other candidates in the race. I wouldn't be at all surprised. I think that's a possibility. The one Republican who's announced is Rob Byers. Ryers is his name. He's a pastor, a co-pastor of a church in Fayetteville. Had some interesting things to say in his announcement, trying to sort of separate himself from Steve Womack. And then the Democrat, a young man named Joshua Mahoney, I think, is the candidate who's announced there. We'll be finding out more about them in the months ahead. Right now, I think the national analysts are still very much listing that as a safe Republican seat.
And part of the Joshua Mahoney at least says he entered the race because of the votes about the Affordable Care Act, repealing, replacing it. So that's another difference from the last election, I think, is that there are some real issues that people are thinking about in less abstract terms than they have been for the past 8 years. What really happens when we repeal and replace something? And of course, all the Donald Trump things just keep going.
Well, Mr. Trump's the troubles notwithstanding, they have kept a fairly low profile on another matter, and that is health care. There have been some town halls that really weren't town halls in the traditional sense, anyway.
That's one thing I think to Representative Womack's credit. He's distinguished himself from most of the delegation other than Senator Cotton, is that he has had some of these public forums where he's, he doesn't shy away from it. He'll get a hard question I've seen a couple times and he'll answer very directly, even though he knows the constituent doesn't like the answer. That's his position. That's what he believes. He believes most of his district supports it, which they have in past elections. Bruce Westerman, he doesn't have any opponent against him announced in the 4th District in Southwest Arkansas. He hasn't had any of these town hall meetings. There was some sort of planned protest this weekend, and he's even had events where they turned away people from coming in because they were identified as non-supporters in advance of this.
Yeah, that was a kind of a strange situation. But back to Womack, I think Jacob is right, and that is that he makes no apologies. I mean, he indicates, I'm a Republican, I supported Trump, I don't agree with you, but I'm listening to what you have to say. So he, I think, gets some credit for taking that approach.
It will be interesting to see if the races are more like the Eldridge-Bozeman race, where one candidate really seemed like they didn't want anyone to know they were running. It was a very kind of quiet campaign, at least, and But it seems like in some of these areas, at least, they're going to have some challengers this time that are going to try to make them respond. And we've seen various local grassroots, typical progressives that you see a lot of protests, they show up to each one of them. You know, they're trying to force them to have to say something about this, and there's a tremendous amount of energy certainly going towards this that wasn't there last time, I think.
There was some speculation, too, that Mr. Hill, because of the character of the 2nd Congressional District and the fact that his opponent did quite well, carried, you know, Pulaski County, Mr. Hill's home county, and those surrounding, the donut, if you will, of the 2nd District, carried into victory, that he might have a slightly more difficult time this time around, but yet we don't.
It seems like, yeah, based on the demographics and previous voting and what Pulaski County and Little Rock means to Democrats in the state, that he will probably have a tougher time than the other ones. It doesn't mean it'll be a tough time necessarily, but I imagine it'll be tougher. The Affordable Care Act vote is something certainly that's very difficult for him to have to address, but also popular. He was voted in on promises to repeal and replace it. It's not a secret that he's opposed to it. He did hold a town hall meeting with Senator Tom Cotton. It was after the first health care debacle, if you want to call it that. So he has gotten up to address this at least, and I think part of that's because of pressure from his district, that there was an expectation that at some point you have to do this kind of thing. No one has announced, Republican or Democrat or Libertarian, that they're going to challenge him yet, but I've spoken with several people that plan to, and I don't know how many they are, but they seem competent candidates who are fairly well known.
Always it seems to come back to money, and unless the national organization sniffs blood in any of those 4 congressional districts, where are you going to get the money? And starts pouring resources in there. If the seat's not considered winnable, frankly, by the national powers, it's almost impossible to raise money. Unless they target a district, it's almost impossible in this environment to raise money locally.
I guess nationally, everyone's looking at the Georgia race with John Ossoff. He's a Democrat in Georgia, challenging a traditionally Republican district. He's young, doesn't have a lot of name recognition, has a lot of Washington connections, and has been raising record amounts of money from all over the country as progressives across the country are trying to do something to change the narrative. So if they could win a district like that, then who knows how open donors would be to places that once seemed pretty tough.
And the counterweight to that is, if the Democrats smell blood, the Republicans will respond with untold resources.
Exactly. The Republicans, I think, are probably not at this point very worried about Arkansas, but if there was an indication that one of the members of the House from Arkansas might be in a weakened position, certainly the Democrats could be expected to do whatever they could to provide resources for a Democratic candidate.
In a way, this next election, since it is, at this point, it seems so tough to win, it's interesting for like an inside baseball perspective of, well, is the Democratic Party able to field candidates, high-quality candidates, regularly, even if it's a tough election? So maybe a turning point in that as well, especially with the national sentiment, the amount of energy and anger from their base. You know, we'll see if they can do anything or not.
And certainly, given the current political situation, it's foolhardy to predict what may be happening in the coming months. I think we're in for a lot more interesting times, to say the least.
Well, Arkansans and various Arkansas interest groups all watching Washington, will particularly on health care, but also on trade and other matters. Based on your long years up there, we're going to see much get done in the next. It's hard to predict.
Well, and that's certainly a very good question. And if you'll notice, again, several members of our congressional delegation have said we need to move on beyond the current controversies and deal with the real issues that are facing the country. That's sort of become a standard Republican line, but the reality is that despite the things that President Trump says about how all he has accomplished in the first 125 days or whatever it is, that not much has been done in terms of basic legislation, and there's not a lot of indication that anything is going to happen real soon, because I think Washington is still caught up in all the controversy and the back and forth surrounding the president.
Got about a minute remaining, and Hoyt, I would ask you to go back probably longer than either one of us to remember. You were in D.C. during the Watergate business.
Yes.
What
yes.
is it about an affair like that, a problem like that, that just grinds the Congress to a halt? What?
Well, it does. It overwhelms everything else, and I think we're seeing that to an extent, not to the extent that we had with Watergate yet, but it certainly seems to be moving in that direction. And I think it sort of takes on a momentum of its own, and there's a dramatic effect to it. It becomes almost addictive to see, what are we going to find out tomorrow? And there are certainly elements of that we're seeing that reflect the history of Watergate that we're seeing now with the current controversies.
All right, got to end it there because we're out of time. Guys, thanks to you for coming in. As always, thanks to you for watching. See you next week.
Local broadcast of Arkansas Week is made possible in part by the award-winning Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, Arkansas's largest major newspaper, bringing you local, national, and international news since 1819. By the Arkansas Times, keeping you informed by covering people, events, and politics in Arkansas. By FM 89, KUAR in Little Rock, with in-depth news reporting, analysis, and discussion each weekday.